Well, I'm Stephanie Trigg, and I'm here today with Eileen Joy, who's a distinguished international visitor to the Centre of Excellence for the History of Emotions here at the University of Melbourne. Eileen's just coming to the end of a month here in Australia, visiting various nodes of the centre. Eileen is an Old English expert. She's also a Middle English expert. She also works on various forms of what we might call post-humanism. Speculative medievalism is a phrase I want to ask her about. She's also an editor of a new journal, Post-Medieval, which has been wildly successful, and a new publishing print imprint, Punctum Books. I'm going to ask Eileen how you would describe yourself given the many activities you're engaged in.
Well, that's a frightening thing to try to do. I think the one word I would use to describe myself is dilettante, producer. Those are the two words that I think most describe myself. Dilettante, which is a really maligned word in our field because it means somebody who's interested in a lot of different things and doesn't focus enough on one thing. And we think of that as someone who is a rank amateur. They're not serious about one particular thing. But I actually am interested in everything, and I want to be as interested in everything as I can be. So I try to go into every field and every type of conference and every type of discipline to see what's happening in there. And then I see my role as a producer within these places, to meet people who are doing interesting work and to try to foster and cultivate that work the way a producer would. I love putting things on, within the university that are intellectual and that create all this cross-disciplinary friction. I'm not as interested, although it looks as if I am, in so-called interdisciplinarity, because I don't even know if we know what that means anymore. I've given up on trying to explain it or understand it, and I think many of the ways in which it's done are kind of shallow. So I think now my new mode, which we talked about when we had the meeting at the Babel Working Group in Boston, is the idea of cruising and collision. How can we bring people together so they just kind of cruise by each other, see what the others are doing, and pick up something from that they might carry into their own work, and also productive collisions, which might not always be happy collisions, shake things up, disturb things, and put things on. And that's how I see my role, to foster work, to cultivate it, and to create spaces where people will run into each other, collide, hook up, one-night stands or more protracted relationships might develop. So that's what I see as my main role, more than being an actual scholar in medieval studies.
Sure. But that is a lovely vision of medieval studies that you have, and it just shows how medieval studies can just branch out so much more widely than it conventionally has done. So this conference that we just held at Melbourne, the Faces of Emotion Collaboratory, and this is a mascot and our beautiful poster for the collaboratory. This is as you know, a photographic portrait by Diane Jones, an Indigenous artist here in Melbourne. This is one of her nieces framed as the Mona Lisa.
Right.
So it's again a lovely conjunction of different temporalities and time zones and conventions of representation.
And I also think it's important to always stitch together different moments in time. I think it's a huge mistake to only focus on one disciplinary period. You can do it, and you have to. You have to specialize in something. And you should know a subject really well by going deep into it. So if you only work in the 14th century, okay, you know a lot about the 14th century that nobody else knows. But if we don't, but I prefer the route of getting on a train and hitting several different stops, a novel, a movie, a medieval romance, the 20th century, the 15th century, and stitching together motifs or terms or images that hook these things up, not because these things have any knowledge of each other or can be related in typical historical fashion. It could be argued that I mash things up in a way that's ahistorical with no regard for obvious synchronicities. But I believe that by doing that, you create a constellation of objects, and out of that constellation, new ideas will kind of rise up to meet you. So the method means you never know in advance what you're going to find. You cannot do this deductively. It has to be inductive, which isn't the way most of us do our scholarship. We want to make an argument, we proceed from a premise, and we look to see if there's evidence that fits. But I prefer to stumble into an arrangement of images and objects that I've put together because it's pleasing to do so and interesting, and then see what leaps out at me in that arrangement.
But it is a hard model for medieval studies
Yes.
to pursue, and especially for younger scholars.
Right.
You know, our centre is very concerned with the future of medieval studies and the future for our excellent graduate students and postdoctoral
Right.
researchers. How can I ask this question? What kind of advice do you have for the next generation coming through who are wanting to work on medieval studies?
I find this question terrifying.
I'm sorry.
Because I'm not sure how to answer it. I know what I hope, right? Two things is, one important thing. The future of medieval studies has to be seen as connected to the future of the humanities. If we decouple those two things, we're doomed. So if we spend all of our energies just thinking about why does medieval studies matter, why does it matter to this or to that, to this discipline, to that discipline, within the university as a whole, and we work solely on the idea that medieval studies has an intrinsic value unto itself, and that has to be defended, funded, extended, etc. Those things matter. I do think medieval studies has a value in and of itself. I think all disciplines do. But if we're worried about the future of medieval studies, I think we have to ask ourselves, what is its role within the humanities? How can it relate to other disciplines and other fields and other temporal periods? Not in a crass way of how some people discuss it, like what is the relevance of the medieval studies to the present? And we've decided it's not relevant. Therefore, who needs it? You know, and not by saying, you know, look at us. You can use us. You know, you need us. All of those relationships are impoverished ultimately, and they never work out. They're like bad marriages, and everybody ends up dissatisfied afterwards. And medieval studies is almost always the loser in those scenarios. So I think what we need is a more vibrant picture of the humanities as a whole and the ways in which the most comparative, long durée, cross-temporal, and global matrices of analysis reap the highest number of benefits. That means collaboration. You still have to have specialization, but you have to have more conversations across periods. And they can't be facile conversations or, you know, brief fleeting stabs at so-called cross-disciplinarity. The future of medieval studies will come when everyone in the humanities realizes that bigger, comparative, long durée projects like the History of Emotions Research Center, which brings together multiple sets of collaborators and individual scholars all coming at the questions the center has posed from multiple time periods to pressing concerns of the present, for which the past is an important resource for retrieving knowledges, perspectives, and experiments that we sometimes forget about. And that's the importance of the medieval past to the present, if that makes sense.
It does.